For 30 years, Johnny Carson didn't just host The Tonight Show. He created a nightly masterclass in spontaneous comedy, where the unexpected became legendary and unscripted chaos turned into television gold. Behind that perfectly timed wit and trademark smile lived comedy's sharpest mind, capable of transforming any mishap, surprise, or absurd moment into something unforgettable. Tonight, we're counting down the 15 funniest moments from Carson's reign as the king of late night. The times when animals ran wild, guests lost control, and Johnny's reactions became just as hilarious as the incidents themselves. And the moment at number 7 generated some of the longest sustained laughter in the show's entire history. A perfect storm of timing, surprise, and Carson's inability to keep his composure. 15. Arnold Schwarzenegger speaks only in German. By the mid-1980s, Arnold Schwarzenegger had successfully transitioned from bodybuilding champion to Hollywood action star, making regular promotional appearances on The Tonight Show. These visits typically followed a predictable formula. Arnold would discuss his latest film, flex a muscle or two, and charm the audience with his thick Austrian accent and self-deprecating humor. But during one memorable appearance, Schwarzenegger decided to completely abandon the script and turn Carson's carefully structured interview into beautiful, bewildering chaos. When Carson asked his opening question, Schwarzenegger responded with a lengthy, earnest answer entirely in German. As he continued speaking passionately in his native language, Carson's expression shifted from polite attention to genuine confusion to barely suppressed laughter. "Johnny had absolutely no idea this was coming," confirmed a producer who was present that night. "He looked at us in the control room like he'd suddenly been transported to a different show." Rather than stopping the bit or calling for a translator, Carson made the brilliant decision to lean into the absurdity. He began nodding thoughtfully, responding with his own nonsensical German-sounding words, and treating the incomprehensible exchange as if it were a perfectly normal conversation. The audience, catching on to the gag, erupted in laughter at the linguistic chaos unfolding before them. After several minutes of this delightful nonsense, Schwarzenegger finally broke character, laughing as he switched to English and explained he'd always wanted to see how Carson would handle such a curveball. What made it brilliant was Johnny's instant commitment to the bit, noted a director who worked on the show. Some hosts would have shut it down immediately, but Johnny recognized the comedy gold and became a full partner in Arnold's prank. That's what separated him from everyone else. 14. Ed Ames' tomahawk lands in the worst possible place. It began as a straightforward demonstration that nobody expected would become one of the most replayed moments in television history.
But that's indefinite.
All right. Right.
Ed Ames, then starring as Mingo on the popular NBC series Daniel Boone, appeared on The Tonight Show in April 1965 to showcase the art of tomahawk throwing, a skill his character regularly displayed on the frontier drama. The segment started innocently enough, with Ames explaining the proper technique while Carson listened attentively, genuinely interested in learning about this unique talent. A wooden silhouette representing a cowboy was brought out as a target, and Ames prepared to demonstrate his precision. What happened next created a moment so perfectly timed, so visually unexpected, that it couldn't have been scripted even if they'd tried. Ames threw the tomahawk with confidence, and it landed with a solid thunk squarely in the wooden figure's crotch. The studio audience erupted into immediate, uncontrollable laughter. But it was Carson's reaction that transformed a funny mishap into television immortality. "Johnny just completely lost it," recalled a director who was in the control room that night. "We'd seen him laugh before, but never like this. He was literally doubled over, tears streaming down his face, unable to speak for what felt like an eternity. Carson's laughing fit lasted nearly 3 minutes, an absolute eternity in television time. Every time he tried to compose himself, he'd glance at the tomahawk still embedded in that unfortunate location and dissolve into fresh hysterics. When he finally caught his breath enough to speak, Carson delivered a perfectly timed quip. "I didn't even know you were Jewish." The line sent the audience into renewed hysteria and showcased his remarkable ability to find the perfect punchline, even while tears of laughter streamed down his face. "That moment showed why Johnny was so beloved," explained a former NBC executive. "The professional mask dropped completely. It was authentic in a way that television rarely is." 13. Animal handler's monkey claims Carson's head as territory.
He's just getting comfortable.
Well, I can't sit here the rest. I can't sit and talk to people with an animal on my head.
Throughout his tenure on The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson welcomed countless animal experts with their exotic companions, creating segments that were always unpredictable and frequently hilarious. These appearances became a beloved staple of the show, with Carson gamely interacting with everything from baby elephants to venomous snakes. But perhaps none was more spontaneously funny than a 1979 appearance by animal handler Joanne Steele and her mischievous capuchin monkey, who decided that Carson's perfectly styled hair looked like the ideal jungle gym. The segment began routinely enough, with Steele explaining the monkey's habits and diet while Carson listened attentively, maintaining his usual professional demeanor. The small primate sat quietly on Steele's shoulder, seemingly well-behaved and content. Then, without any warning whatsoever, the monkey made its move. "It just launched itself right onto Johnny's head," recalled a camera operator who was working that night. "There was no build-up, no indication it was about to happen. 1 second, it was sitting quietly. The next, it was using Johnny's famous hair as its personal playground." What made the moment legendary wasn't just the monkey's antics, but Carson's perfect reaction. Rather than panicking, calling for help, or even trying to remove the animal, he remained almost perfectly still, a look of resigned amusement spreading across his face as the primate thoroughly destroyed his carefully styled hair. His eyes conveyed a mixture of, "This is my life now," and barely suppressed laughter as the monkey continued its exploration. "Johnny's hair was sacred," explained a makeup artist who worked on the show. "It was always perfect, not a single strand out of place." To see it completely demolished by a monkey while he just sat there with that deadpan expression, it was absolute comedy gold. When the monkey finally returned to its handler, Carson looked directly into the camera, his hair sticking up in every conceivable direction, and delivered the perfect line. "And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why I prefer cats." The audience exploded with laughter at his unflappable response to the chaos.
This is, right.
It's a heavy snake. What does it weigh, about 50, 60 pounds?
She weighs about, yeah, she weighs...
12. Snake escapes and Carson's flight response kicks in. Joan Embry of the San Diego Zoo was a regular Tonight Show guest, bringing a rotating cast of exotic animals for Carson to interact with, sometimes enthusiastically, sometimes with visible reluctance. These segments always carried an element of unpredictability, but one appearance in the late 1970s provided a moment of genuine spontaneous comedy that revealed something delightful about Carson. Beneath that cool, unflappable exterior lived a man who really did not want a giant snake crawling toward him. Embry had brought several animals that day, including a particularly large Burmese python that she assured everyone was perfectly docile. As she was explaining fascinating facts about the snake's hunting habits and diet, the massive reptile began to move more actively than expected, suddenly slithering off the desk and heading directly toward Carson with surprising speed and determination. Johnny was not faking that response, laughed a floor director who witnessed the incident. That was pure, unfiltered fight-or-flight response on national television. Carson's reaction was immediate and utterly human. He leapt from his chair with remarkable agility, backing away from the approaching reptile with a look of genuine alarm plastered across his face. The carefully cultivated image of the cool, collected host vanished completely, replaced by a guy who wanted absolutely nothing to do with that snake. The audience erupted in hysterics, not at Carson's expense, but in recognition of their own likely reaction to the same situation. He had a well-known discomfort with some of the more intimidating animals, explained a camera operator who worked many of Embry's segments. Though he was always game to try, when that snake made its move, all pretense disappeared. Once the snake was safely recaptured by Embry and her assistants, Carson returned to his chair, straightened his tie with exaggerated dignity, and delivered the perfect recovery line. "Somebody better check my pants." The audience lost it completely, and Carson's willingness to laugh at his own very human moment of terror made it all the funnier.
Particular interest of mine, and I'm very proud to present this gentleman's amazing illusions. Would you welcome the Great Flydini?
11. Steve Martin's Great Flydini leaves Carson in tears. When Steve Martin appeared on The Tonight Show in 1980, he was already establishing himself as a revolutionary force in comedy, pioneering a new kind of anti-humor that derived its power from being deliberately awkward, absurd, and sometimes completely nonsensical. For this particular appearance, Martin announced he would perform a magic act, prompting Carson to step aside and give him center stage. What followed was one of the strangest, most brilliantly bizarre performances ever seen on The Tonight Show, and it reduced Carson to helpless laughter. Martin's Great Flydini routine featured the comedian pretending to unzip his pants and pull various impossible objects from his fly: eggs, a salt shaker, a ringing telephone, and eventually a tiny hand that waved cheerfully to the audience. The bit was so absurd, so committed, and so perfectly executed that it transcended typical comedy into something beautifully surreal. The beauty of that moment was watching Johnny's reaction, recalled a writer who worked on the show. He started out playing the straight man, professionally holding it together. But as the routine got more and more absurd, you could see him genuinely losing it. By the end of the performance, Carson was doubled over, struggling to maintain any composure whatsoever, as Martin continued with complete deadpan seriousness, treating each increasingly ridiculous reveal as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Watching Carson, a man who had seen thousands of comedy acts, reduced to tears of genuine, surprised laughter, was a testament to Martin's unique genius. "Johnny loved being genuinely entertained," explained a producer who worked with both men. Very few performers could truly surprise him anymore. Steve was one of the rare ones who could make Johnny feel like a regular audience member again, someone who didn't know what was coming next and was delighted by the discovery.
The comedy can heal you. Praise the power.
Praise the Jesus.
And Sears had a sale. This furniture went
10. Robin Williams goes completely rogue and Carson surrenders control. When Robin Williams appeared on The Tonight Show, the normally structured format of late-night television gave way to pure, uncontrolled chaos. Williams, with his manic energy and lightning-fast improvisational skills, simply couldn't be contained within Carson's usual interview framework. Within seconds of sitting down, he would launch into rapid-fire impressions, leap from the guest chair to demonstrate a physical bit, and transform the entire set into his personal playground. Johnny once said Robin was like trying to catch lightning in a bottle while it's already running away, recalled a Tonight Show writer who witnessed several of Williams' appearances. A particularly memorable appearance occurred in the early 1980s when Williams was ostensibly there to promote a film. That plan lasted approximately 30 seconds. Without warning, he launched into a series of spontaneous characters, using Carson's desk props as improvised comedy tools, speaking in voices ranging from a Russian poet to a Southern preacher, sometimes switching mid-sentence. The producers would be in the control room in a panic, revealed a director who worked on several of Williams' appearances. They'd be saying, "Where is he going with this? Should we cut to commercial?" But Johnny would just wave them off. He recognized that with Robin, you had to let go and enjoy the ride. What made these appearances special was watching Carson, normally the one in control, willingly surrender the reins to Williams' frenetic genius. Rather than trying to steer the conversation back to prepared talking points, Carson would simply lean back in his chair, sometimes wiping away tears of laughter, content to serve as an audience member rather than a host. His occasional attempts to interject would be swept away by Williams' comedic tornado, and Carson seemed to genuinely delight in the chaos. Johnny loved that Robin kept him on his toes, explained a producer. After thousands of interviews that followed predictable patterns, Robin was gloriously unpredictable. That's the highest compliment Johnny could give a guest. 9. Don Rickles breaks Carson's cigarette box and pays the price.
Carson's cigarette box! Oh, I broke his box! I broke Carson's cigarette box!
Johnny Carson was known for being meticulous about his set. Every item on his desk had its place, and none was more personal than a wooden cigarette box that had become something of a trademark prop. So when Don Rickles guest hosted The Tonight Show in October 1973 and accidentally broke that cigarette box during his opening monologue, he knew he was in trouble. The next night, when Carson returned, he mentioned the broken box on air, showing the audience the damage and promising retribution against Rickles, with that trademark smile that could mean either affection or genuine threat. But no one, including Rickles himself, could have predicted what form that retribution would take. A few months later, Carson learned that Rickles was filming his sitcom, CPO Sharky, on a nearby NBC soundstage. In an unprecedented move that showed Carson's willingness to completely abandon protocol for the sake of comedy, he decided to interrupt the live taping with cameras in tow. That was completely unplanned, revealed a Tonight Show producer who was present. Johnny just looked at us during a commercial break and said, "Isn't Rickles taping today? Let's go over there." The crew grabbed what equipment they could and literally ran across the studio lot. What followed was one of the most spontaneous and hilarious moments in Carson's entire tenure. He burst onto Rickles' set during an actual scene, with the CPO Sharky audience completely confused about what was happening. Rickles, caught mid-scene in his Navy uniform, looked genuinely shocked as Carson stormed in, demanding justice for his broken cigarette box. The exchange that followed was comedy gold. Rickles protesting that he was in the middle of filming, Carson insisting he didn't care about Rickles' scene, and both men barely able to keep straight faces. What made the moment transcend typical comedy was how it showcased the genuine friendship between the two men. Despite Carson's mock anger, his affection for Rickles was obvious, as was Rickles' delight at being ambushed by the normally reserved host. Johnny wouldn't have done that with just anyone, noted a director who worked with both men. It showed how comfortable they were together and how much Johnny actually loved Don's ability to make him laugh.
Aren't
you getting a little older?
I know your age. The prom's over.
8. Carson crashes. His own monologue. Thanks to Don Rickles. One of the most predictable elements of The Tonight Show was its format. Carson's nightly monologue was a television institution, delivered with clockwork regularity for 3 decades. This predictability made it all the more surprising when, during one memorable broadcast in the early 1980s, the sacred monologue was interrupted in spectacular fashion by the one person who could get away with such audacity, Don Rickles, Carson had just begun his nightly jokes when Don Rickles, scheduled to appear later in the show, began heckling him loudly from backstage. The audience, initially confused about where the disruption was coming from, soon realized what was happening as Rickles' distinctive voice became clearly audible, shouting increasingly outrageous comments about Carson's delivery. "That was not planned at all," confirmed a stage manager who was present that night. "Don was supposed to wait quietly backstage like any other guest. Nobody expected him to start yelling during the monologue." Carson, momentarily thrown off his rhythm, paused mid-joke. Then, instead of trying to continue or ignore the interruption, he did something completely unexpected. He broke character entirely, turned toward the curtain where the heckling was coming from, and called out, "Don, get out here." The audience erupted as Rickles emerged, feigning complete innocence, but clearly delighted at having disrupted the show's careful routine. Johnny breaking format like that, stopping his monologue completely, was unprecedented, explained the stage manager, but he recognized that the spontaneous moment was better than any prepared joke. What followed was pure comedic chaos, with Rickles and Carson bantering while the monologue cards sat forgotten on the desk. Carson eventually brought Rickles to the guest chair a full segment earlier than scheduled, completely abandoning his prepared material. "Johnny loved Don because he was genuinely unpredictable," explained a producer who worked with both men. "In a show that necessarily ran on routine and structure, Rickles represented the possibility that anything could happen." Johnny found that energizing rather than threatening.
"And there are nights when I think I feel that stare, and I reach out my hand to stroke his hair, and he's not there."
7. Jimmy Stewart's poem reduces Carson to tears. Jimmy Stewart was a frequent and beloved guest on The Tonight Show throughout Carson's tenure. Their rapport was always warm and genuine, with Stewart's gentle, sometimes halting delivery providing a perfect counterpoint to Carson's smooth professionalism. These appearances typically featured light Hollywood stories and affectionate reminiscing about the golden age of cinema. But in 1981, Stewart appeared on the show and mentioned that he had written a poem about his dog Bo, who had recently passed away. Carson, likely expecting a light-hearted tribute to a beloved pet, invited him to read it. What followed instead was one of the most genuinely moving and unexpectedly hilarious moments in the show's history. Stewart began reading the poem simply enough, but as he continued, the emotion in his voice became increasingly apparent. The poem, which started with fond memories of his companion, gradually revealed deeper feelings about love, loyalty, and the pain of loss. "And there are nights when I think I feel that stare, and I reach out my hand to stroke his hair, but he's not there," Stewart read, his distinctive voice wavering. The studio audience, expecting typical Tonight Show entertainment, found themselves experiencing something far more profound and genuine. As Stewart finished reading, the camera caught something remarkable. Johnny Carson, television's most controlled personality, with genuine emotion visible on his face. Johnny was actually tearing up, confirmed a director who was in the control room that night. This wasn't TV emotion for the audience. This was Johnny Carson, the man, not the host, genuinely touched by Jimmy's words. For several seconds, Carson seemed at a loss for words, an almost unprecedented occurrence for the master of quick wit. But then came the moment that transformed genuine emotion into one of the longest sustained laughs in Tonight Show history. As Carson tried to compose himself and transition to the next segment, he attempted to speak, but couldn't quite get the words out. His face contorted as he fought between laughter and tears, creating an expression so genuinely human and relatable that the audience began laughing with him, not at the poem, but at Carson's struggle to maintain composure. "Johnny didn't try to cover with a joke immediately," noted a producer who witnessed the exchange. He gave the moment the respect it deserved first, and then his own reaction became the comedy. That's what made it unforgettable.
Ben, Joey. Hello.
6. Dean Martin's drunk act reaches peak perfection. Dean Martin had built his public persona around the image of the charming, slightly inebriated performer who could deliver perfectly timed jokes while appearing to be halfway to intoxication. This carefully crafted character made him one of the most beloved entertainers of his era and a frequent guest on The Tonight Show. During a memorable appearance in the 1970s, Martin seemed to lean particularly hard into his tipsy persona, slurring words, missing his chair when trying to sit down, and delivering punchlines with the exaggerated precision of someone working very hard to appear sober. Dean was playing it up more than usual that night, recalled the director who worked on the show. The audience was eating it up. They loved the idea that they were seeing the real Dean Martin, the life of the party who had maybe had a few too many before coming on air. What made the appearance particularly entertaining was Carson's response. Rather than trying to rein Martin in or steer the conversation towards safer territory, Carson effectively became Martin's straight man, setting up situations that allowed the seemingly intoxicated performer to deliver increasingly outrageous responses. The segment reached its comedic peak when Martin attempted to tell a story about a golf game, lost his train of thought mid-anecdote, looked confused for a moment, then simply shrugged and said, "Ah, who cares?" It wasn't that funny anyway. The audience erupted at this apparent moment of drunken candor. Johnny knew exactly what Dean was doing, explained a producer who worked with both men. Dean's drunk act was just that, an act, or at least a greatly exaggerated version of reality. But Johnny understood that audiences loved that persona, so he gave Dean the space to play it to the hilt. What made the performance brilliant was the ambiguity Martin maintained. You were never quite sure how much was an act and how much was real, noted the producer. Johnny appreciated that mystery. It created electricity in the studio because viewers felt like anything might happen, and that unpredictability made for incredible television.
I was a little bit late, and I'm sorry if I upset anybody here. I had an unusual incident in traffic. I either ran over a sheep or I ran over a small man wearing a sheepskin coat.
5. George Carlin sneaks in his censorship jab. George Carlin had built much of his later career around challenging societal norms and pushing the boundaries of what could be said on television, most famously with his 7 words you can never say on television routine. His appearances on The Tonight Show required a delicate balance, allowing Carlin to be himself while respecting the network's content restrictions. During a 1983 appearance, Carlin delivered a seemingly innocent monologue about everyday observations, but embedded within it was a subtle, unmistakable jab at network censorship that was clever enough to slip past NBC's standards department, but immediately caught by the more alert members of the audience and by Carson himself. Johnny definitely got what George was doing, confirmed a writer who worked on the show at the time. You could see it in his reaction, that knowing smile and the quick glance toward the camera. He was essentially saying to the audience, "Yes, I caught that too, and I'm going to let it slide." What made the moment special was Carson's silent complicity. Rather than steering the conversation in another direction or creating distance between himself and Carlin's subversive humor, Carson's reaction suggested a personal appreciation for Carlin's cleverness in navigating the restrictions. Johnny had his own issues with network interference over the years, explained a producer who worked closely with Carson. While he wasn't a boundary pusher like Carlin, he respected comedians who found creative ways to say what they wanted to say despite the limitations placed on them. The network executives were reportedly less amused when they realized what had happened. According to staff members, NBC received several complaints about the segment, questioning how such content had made it to air. Johnny defended Carlin in private, the producer continued. He essentially told the network that if they couldn't figure out what Carlin had done until after it aired, then the comedian had earned the right to get away with it. Johnny appreciated cleverness above almost everything else. For viewers, the moment represented a rare instance of television commenting on its own restrictions, a meta moment where Carson, Carlin, and the more perceptive audience members shared a joke that existed partly because of the very censorship it was critiquing. 4. Sammy Davis Jr.'s rapid-fire impression blitz. Sammy Davis Jr. is one of the most multi-talented entertainers in show business history. A singer, dancer, actor, and comedian whose versatility made him a frequent and welcome guest on The Tonight Show throughout Carson's tenure. During one particularly memorable appearance in the 1970s, a casual conversation about fellow entertainers suddenly transformed into an extraordinary display of Davis's mimicry skills when he launched into a series of rapid-fire impressions that left Carson and the audience in absolute awe. In less than a minute, Davis seamlessly morphed into Frank Sinatra, Jerry Lewis, and Jimmy Stewart, capturing not just their voices, but their distinctive physical mannerisms with uncanny accuracy. Each impression flowed into the next without pause, creating a virtuoso performance that showcased decades of observing and absorbing the essence of his fellow performers. Johnny was literally clutching his stomach laughing, recalled a camera operator who was working that night. Not the polite laugh he'd give to less impressive bits, but genuine, helpless laughter. He was as entertained as the audience was. What made the moment special was its complete spontaneity. Unlike prepared segments where guests would come with rehearsed material, this impression sequence emerged organically from the conversation, showcasing Davis's remarkable ability to access his vast repertoire of voices and mannerisms instantaneously. Sammy didn't need preparation, explained a producer who worked on several of Davis's appearances. He lived and breathed these characters. He'd spent decades studying these people up close, performing with them, hanging out with them. What looked like an amazing trick to the audience was second nature to him. Carson's reaction revealed his genuine appreciation for Davis's talents. As a former performer himself, Carson understood exactly how difficult it was to capture another performer's essence so perfectly and to switch between completely different personalities with no transition time. Johnny once told me that Sammy was the most complete entertainer he'd ever met, revealed a writer who worked closely with Carson. He said if you could only watch one person perform for the rest of your life, Sammy would be the smart choice, because he could effectively become dozens of different entertainers. Three, Dolly Parton handles Carson's bold comment with grace. When Dolly Parton appeared on The Tonight Show in 1977, she was already famous for both her extraordinary musical talent and her voluptuous figure, the latter often the subject of jokes that Parton herself frequently made with good humor and self-awareness. During their interview, Carson and Parton engaged in the kind of playful banter that was a hallmark of The Tonight Show, with both trading quips and creating an atmosphere of relaxed fun that audiences loved. As the conversation continued, Carson made a comment that would become one of the most talked-about moments in the show's history. Looking at Parton's outfit, Carson remarked with a mischievous grin, "I'd give a year of my life to see what's under there." The studio audience erupted in a mixture of gasps and laughter, caught between shock at the directness and appreciation for the chutzpah. "You could feel the control room holding its breath," recalled a director who was working that night. "That was unusually direct, even for that era." What made the moment comedic rather than uncomfortable was Parton's instant, perfect response. Without missing a beat, she shot back with her trademark wit, turning the moment into a masterclass in handling awkward situations with humor and confidence. Her delivery was so perfect, so disarming, that it transformed what could have been an uncomfortable exchange into one of the show's funniest interactions. Dolly was a professional, explained a producer who worked on the show. She knew how to turn any situation into comedy gold, and she never let anyone make her uncomfortable. The exchange showcased why both Carson and Parton were masters of their craft. His willingness to take comedic risks and her ability to handle anything thrown at her with grace, humor, and lightning-fast wit. The audience's sustained laughter came not from the initial comment, but from watching two entertainment pros volley back and forth with perfect timing and genuine enjoyment of the comedic moment they were creating together. 2. Bob Hope's material falls flat, and Carson can't hide it. Bob Hope was one of America's most beloved entertainers, a comedy legend whose career spanned vaudeville, radio, film, and television. His appearances on The Tonight Show should have been highlight moments, and in earlier years they often were. But by the 1980s, a troubling pattern had emerged. Hope, then, in his late 70s and early 80s, would arrive with dated material, often reading jokes from cue cards and seeming disconnected from the audience's reaction, recycling the same jokes about golf and politics that he'd been telling for decades. Johnny dreaded those appearances, revealed a writer who worked on the show during this period. Earlier in his career, Bob had been brilliant, but by this point, he was essentially going through the motions. What made these segments particularly uncomfortable was watching Carson, himself a master of comedy timing, forced to pretend that Hope's material was landing better than it actually was. The most awkward of these appearances occurred in the mid-1980s when Hope arrived with a set of jokes about current events that felt stale and disconnected from reality. As Hope continued reading from his cards, seemingly oblivious to the tepid audience response, Carson's face told the real story, a mixture of professional courtesy and genuine discomfort. Johnny's smile got tighter and tighter, recalled a camera operator who was present that night. He was doing that thing where he'd loosen his tie and glance at Ed McMahon, his signal that things weren't going well, but he was going to soldier through anyway. The comedy came not from Hope's jokes, but from watching Carson's increasingly transparent attempts to salvage the segment. What made these moments both funny and poignant was the contrast between Hope's earlier brilliance and his later appearances. Carson, who deeply respected comedy's traditions and its pioneering figures, found himself in the uncomfortable position of witnessing a legend who had outlasted his ability to connect with an audience. Yet Carson's professionalism never wavered, even as his facial expressions told viewers everything they needed to know about the quality of what they were witnessing. One, Don Rickles roasts Frank Sinatra and lives to tell about it. When Frank Sinatra appeared on The Tonight Show in 1976, he arrived with the aura of untouchable celebrity that had made him a legend and had made many comedians wary of targeting him with their humor. Sinatra's connections and temperament were well known in Hollywood, and few performers were willing to risk his displeasure by making him the butt of their jokes. Don Rickles was not among those cautious few. With Sinatra seated next to him on Carson's couch, Rickles launched into one of his trademark roasts, treating the chairman of the board with the same irreverent disrespect he might show any audience member at his nightclub act. "Look at him, he's the big star," Rickles began, gesturing dismissively towards Sinatra. "He comes on and everybody thinks he's so wonderful. Let me tell you something. This man is overrated." As Rickles continued his barrage, the camera caught Carson's reaction, a mixture of nervous laughter and genuine concern about how Sinatra might respond to this public ribbing. Johnny was actually nervous, confirmed a producer who was present that night. Carson had seen Sinatra's temper firsthand over the years and knew he didn't always take kindly to being the butt of jokes. There was real tension in the studio. The moment reached its comedic peak when Rickles, in typical fashion, grabbed Sinatra's knee, and said with mock desperation, "Frank, believe me, I'm only kidding. You know I love you. Can I get a ride home?" The studio erupted in laughter, and to everyone's relief, Sinatra burst into genuine laughter himself, clearly appreciating Rickles' willingness to treat him like any other target, rather than handling him with kid gloves because of his legendary status. What made this moment hilarious rather than terrifying was watching the dynamic unfold. Rickles' audacity, Carson's visible anxiety, and Sinatra's ultimate good humor all colliding in a perfect storm of comedy. "That took guts," Carson later admitted to his producer. "Not many people talk to Sinatra that way and live to tell about it." The fact that Rickles not only survived, but had Sinatra laughing along made it one of the greatest displays of fearless comedy in Tonight Show history. For 30 years, Johnny Carson proved that the funniest moments in television aren't always the ones you plan. From animals claiming his perfectly styled hair as their personal playground, to legends like Sinatra getting roasted without mercy. From Dean Martin's masterful drunk act to Jimmy Stewart's poem that somehow made everyone laugh and cry at the same time, Carson's genius was his ability to recognize comedy gold when chaos struck. He understood that authentic reactions, genuine surprise, and the willingness to surrender control often created better television than any script ever could. These 15 moments remind us why Carson remains the undisputed king of late night. Because he knew that the best laughs come from simply letting the madness unfold.